everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. Today's guest is Michela Ratto of New York by way of San Francisco. For today's episode, Michela chose to discuss Phish's performance of the Moma Dance with a segue into We Are the Champions by Queen right in the middle from the Bill Graham Civic Auditorium in San Francisco on October 29th, 2014. Baseball has come up a number of times on this podcast, most notably with Hal Hansen, who chose to discuss Phish's show from June 28, 2000 at the Garden State Arts Center. The baseball aspect of that conversation was more about the comparison with obsessed Phish fans with statistic-minded baseball savants. Today's talk with Michela goes a lot deeper and gets a lot more specific than that, as she brings up the feelings of what it was like to be in San Francisco rooting for her hometown team in the World Series at a Phish show, and what it's like when they clinch the championship right at the start of the second set. But that's just one part of it. Today's conversation covers a lot of ground as we discuss the fall 2014 tour, sisterhood, working at Chili's, and so much more. On top of that, there are those times at shows when something even bigger than Phish is going on in the city they're playing, and yet they manage to fuse it into their playing. They harness the excitement in the air, both outside and inside the venue. For Michela and San Francisco Giants fans at the Bill Graham that night, this was one of those times. You'll also hear Michela mention a few times that she and I go to a lot of shows together, and there's good reason for that. We're engaged. By the time this episode airs, she and I should be on our way to getting married, so this was a personal interview in a lot of ways. But that's a bigger story even than Phish. So in the meantime, let's join Michela to chat about the best sandwiches in Saratoga Springs, the king of ground scores, and JT Snow saving the life of a young child as we go over the Moma Dance from October 29th, 2014 at the Bill Graham Civic Auditorium in San Francisco. Michela, welcome to Attendance Bias. How are you?
Oh, I'm so good, Brian. Thank you so much for having me. What a treat.
It is a treat. I'm excited to talk to you about the Moma Dance, into We Are the Champions, back into the Moma Dance from October 29th, 2014 at the BGCA, the Bill Graham Civic Auditorium in San Francisco, and especially about the Fall Tour 2014, because I know almost nothing about that tour. I wasn't at any of the shows, and we'll talk about that a little later, but you were at a lot of those shows, so I'm sure you have plenty to say.
2014 was the time in my life when I had no priority at all other than seeing Phish with my sister as much as humanly possible. So this is a tour that I have a lot of fond memories of and a lot of blank spaces where memories should be. And in general, just a grand old time, 2014.
Well, we're going to talk about it in detail, but before we get to do that, let's hear about you as a fan for the Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
Michela, when was your first Phish show?
First Phish show was 8/17/2012. It was also a Bill Graham Civic Auditorium, Civic Arena Auditorium, right?
Civic Auditorium.
Yeah. When I think about it, was such an insane sort of butterfly effect that landed me at this show. I had never listened to Phish before this. I had never thought about listening to Phish before this. I have since 2012 seen 91 shows, but at the time, basically spring of 2012, I was all geared up to move from where I was living in South Lake Tahoe. I was going to move with some friends back to the Huntington, West Virginia area. And on the way, my car died, like irrevocably imploded in Utah, eastern Utah, got it towed to Grand Junction, Colorado. It became very clear it was not going to make it any further than that. With all of my worldly possessions now in this broken down Volvo station wagon, I decided instead of pushing on to West Virginia, I would put everything in a U-Haul and go back and spend the summer at home in the Bay Area with my family. I owe it so much, this butterfly flapping its wings. My sister was living in San Francisco at a time with her longtime boyfriend, and just kind of out of nowhere one Sunday night, he just broke up with her, and it was very devastating. Again, at the time, could not imagine so much positive coming out of it. But what this did was it made it so that for the first time since my sister graduated high school, all of my family was under one roof in San Mateo, California. And my sister and her now ex-boyfriend had been planning to go on like a big West Coast run where they were going to see all of these Bill Graham shows. They were going to go down to LA and see some shows. And when they broke up, he got custody of the LA tickets and she got custody of the San Francisco tickets. She sold 2 of the nights, but she was like, listen, I've been looking forward to going to these shows so much. I can't bear to not go at all. Would you mind coming with me to just one show? I just, I can't do it alone. It's free. You don't have to pay. And like, she's like begging me to come to the show. And I'm like, oh, I'll do an act of charity for you here and go with you to this show. And it was obviously, it completely blew my mind and changed my life. And about a month later, she and I were driving cross country, moving to New York together. And we just listened to Phish the entire way. And I just pestered her with questions nonstop about the band and their history and everything. And the rest is our history, my sister and I's, and ended up seeing them together so many fun places and really brought us together and cemented our friendship, I think, up until we got into Phish together, up until she got me into Phish. We really thought of ourselves as very different people, and Phish really taught us that we're more the same than different, and that we have so much in common and had so many adventures to share. So crazy circumstance leading up to that first show.
What was it about that first show that grabbed you as a fan?
I will say the first instant of me being like, whoa, was they opened with AC/DC Bag, as now I know they do often. But at the time, I had zero context for anything. In one of the first big, let's get the show on the road. First of all, hearing this huge cheer go up at that. And there's just such a crazy swell of applause. And I was just like, oh, hey, here we go. And someone in one of the first, big downbeat fun moments of that song threw a handful of green glow sticks. And I'd never seen anything so perfectly syncopated of just whimsy. And I was turned to my sister and I was like, does the band plan that? And she was like, no, that's just some guy just threw those glow sticks. She's like, don't worry, that there's going to be a lot more of that. And I was like, oh, brother, I don't know if I can handle much more. This is 30 seconds into AC/DC Bag. And I was just beside myself. I mean, the light show, everything about it to me was so overwhelmingly something that I wanted to be a part of. And also, probably prior to this, I had viewed my sister as she's so professional, she's so put together. And I didn't have really many memories of her cutting loose. And so to look over and to see her just dancing with her eyes closed and smiling and so free and happy. And it was just so clear she was just in a place, and she had been taking this breakup pretty rough. So to go from kind of seeing her be quite sad and stuff around our parents' house to then being not just at peace, but sort of euphoric was such a joy. I just stared at her for probably too long in the show, but just watching her enjoy it really was so contagious for me. And I wanted to know all the words and all the clapping and all the dances and everything that everyone else knew. It was I simply must be a part of this. So really a great time.
You did. It sounds like you did eventually. Well, what was your most recent show and what did you think of it?
Most recent was Mexico 2022. Really can't say enough about that as an experience. I mean, it's hard to even just talk about the shows kind of agnostic from the whole experience of being at the Moon Palace Resort, which is to me an unrivaled luxury in my lifetime of just being able to order a shrimp cocktail anytime you want and someone will bring it to you and you don't have to pay for it. I mean, I know you paid in advance, but it doesn't feel that way when you're there. It just feels like you're in some kind of Garden of Eden. You, I know, went to Mexico 2020 and were kind of evangelizing about it in the same way I am now of you won't believe how nice it is. But there is really nothing just grooving on the beach. And then a very friendly waiter just asks if you need any water and hands you an ice cold glass of water or a margarita or a beer. And there's no words I can use other than to just say the words shrimp cocktail over and over again. But
we said it all.
It's really an incredible privilege to go to that.
What's something you must have on you going into a show?
If we were doing this podcast like 8 years ago or so, the answer would probably be something pretty cool, like cigarettes, or, like, I've got to have a little bit of Molly, bro. I probably would say something much cooler than what I take with me now, which is I have to have my panic attack medication. And for those times that don't quite reach the full fever pitch of a panic attack, I have some these anxiety chews. This is not an ad, but I highly recommend these to anyone who, like me, gets easily overwhelmed in a crowd now, 2 years into COVID. Not so used to being in crowds, and sometimes you get in them and you're like, what if there is a fire? And you can't get that thought out of your head. So you got to take these little chews. Yeah, I can't imagine going to a show or even to a grocery store without my anxiety chews. The PYM, prepare your mind, for anyone interested in taking the edge off of your intrusive thoughts. They're really great.
And I will reach out to them and see if they will sponsor me, because it seems like they work very well.
Oh, I'm happy to record endless advertising spots for Prepare Your Mind Chews if needed. If that sponsorship lands, can't say enough good about the anxiety chews.
So you mentioned in your earlier Phish bio, your origin story about how your car broke down. I mean, it sounds like you were living the lifestyle of a Wook before you even heard of Phish. And now you live in New York, and you were moving to New York back then. So I have to ask, part of the lightning round, East Coast Phish or West Coast Phish?
It's a good question, because I do feel like when I am seeing shows on the West Coast, I can let that inner Wook out a little bit more, simply because there's no chance I'm going to like run into my boss. I don't know. Like, there's no chance he would be a Phish anyway, but like the East Coast feels to me in my life and with my personal, but like East Coast is for business. West Coast is for fun. It is a really hard choice because I do have more friends now, I think, based on the East Coast. So there's a great chance if I'm, doing a pretty good tour up and down the Eastern Seaboard that I'll get to stay with friends or at least visit with friends. But at a West Coast show, I would maybe get to have a little cheeseburger from In-N-Out after a show. So the question becomes really like, which do I prefer, my dear friends or number 2 with onions and animal style fries? It's hard to say, but I guess I'll pick my friends in the end. So it's East Coast over West Coast.
Well, then along those same lines, what's your favorite East Coast venue and what's your favorite West Coast venue?
Favorite East Coast venue is probably SPAC. Just feels very special for my sister and I. Somewhere we've seen the band a ton. The first time I went, I think SPAC was my first outdoor show I'd ever seen, because up to that point, I'm sorry, Bangor, Maine was my first outdoor show in 2013. But SPAC, then I guess its hyper-specific stat is it's my first outdoor show with only my sister, because we had other friends with us in Bangor. I just think the grounds are so beautiful. I'm like, you couldn't ask for a more beautiful lot to just be in, drinking Narragansetts than the SPAC lot is. So just the softest grass. And I've just always had a great time there. I would say that's my favorite East Coast venue. Favorite West Coast venue is probably the Bill Graham. I have never seen a bad show there. And it seems like every run that I have been to at the Bill Graham, there is at least one like extremely special show. You and I saw a great run there, I think in 2016, where they played an unbelievably, like maybe my favorite no quarter I've ever heard. They played, that crazy bust out show? I feel like they played like, was it Dear Prudence or like
Cry Baby Cry?
Cry Baby Cry. Yes, it was Cry Baby Cry or Rocky Raccoon
Demand.
or something. Yeah, they
played Sing Monica, I think.
Yes, they did play Sing Monica in that run. They played Alumni Blues. It's like, it was just at this point in my Phish life, like the 20 teens, I was like keeping a journal of like every time, tracking how many times I'd seen every song and where. And which days. And so like that was like an insane run for me to just be like, oh my God, like all of these things I'd been chasing and had never seen. And finally, I mean, that was wild. So yeah, I feel like every time I'm at the Bill Graham, there's at least one night that's like truly magical.
You mentioned In and Out earlier as a pillar of a reason that you like West Coast Phish. Overall, what's the best meal you've ever had on tour?
This is a toughie. I mean, I could do a whole episode. I could talk about this
podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I could talk about food that I've eaten on tour for conservatively 84 years. But I know this is a lightning round, so I will say a meal I always look forward to, tying into how much I love SPAC. There is a little Italian market in Saratoga Springs called Cardona's. I think it's like Cardona's Saratoga Market or something like that. My sister and I just kind of stumbled upon it the first time we were in Saratoga Springs, and now we go there every time. Great little Italian market, fabulous sandwiches. I usually get either their wine cured capicola or a sweet soppressata sandwich, a little provolone, a little pesto mayo, a little LTO, it's lettuce, tomato, onion for the uninitiated, side of pickle. And then we always get a big assortment of Italian cookies that will like last us throughout the run, which is like, I mean, what is more fun to come back to your car and get after a great show than one of those little green or red leaf cookies, sandwich cookies, so great. And then I always get a San Pellegrino Aranciata Rosa, the little blood orange soda to wash it all down. And it's just like to pull into our parking spot with that like particular picnic sitting in the back seat waiting for us is like, we feel like queens of the lot. And I really look forward, like anytime the band announces a tour, like my first thought is like, will they play back? Will I get my sandwich? So it's really like summers have been planned around getting that sandwich.
Well, today's episode is about the Moma Dance into We Are the Champions, because the We Are the Champions was played because the Giants won the World Series that night. So to you as a baseball fan, who is your favorite San Francisco Giant of all time?
Oh, so it's definitely changed over the course of my life. You know, an easy out is to just say, hey, Willie Mays, and call it a day. But in terms of players for my lifetime, definitely loved, like in the 2002 World Series when JT Snow scooped up Dusty Baker's son on that big, I think it was David Bell hit the big RBI, maybe triple, the double or triple, like a big play. And little Darren Baker, who now is playing baseball himself. I think he got drafted by the Nationals. But he was the bat boy at the time and ran up and was like in definite danger of just being like absolutely trampled by three men in a row. And JT Snow like stopped and scooped him up. I think like every male attracted baseball fan in the world really felt some stirrings for JT Snow. So he was definitely a favorite of that era. Same with the catcher at the time, Benito Santiago. My family won a raffle of like an autographed Benito Santiago bat. And then like, it's just been in our house kind of ominously, like not displayed, just like leaning on stuff for the past 20 years or so. But from that raffle onwards, we're like, this is a Benito Santiago family.
It's so funny he's how a favorite. That works, because when I was saving up, I used to collect baseball cards, and there was a baseball card store on a street near my house called First and Third. And they had these little wood plaques with signed baseballs into tiny little plastic, like screw-on shields onto the plaque. And they were all different prices based on the player. And the only one that I could afford was like $22. And it was Eric Davis of the Cincinnati Reds. And I have no connection at all to the Cincinnati Reds, but I could afford that plaque. So all of a sudden, Eric Davis was my favorite player. And he was my favorite Cincinnati Red of all time. Forget Pete Rose. Forget the Big Red Machine as a whole. Go Eric Davis.
Eric, love it. I would say now, and for the past 10 years or so, number one Giant for me is Brandon Crawford. I love that he is a Bay Area native son, and we are the same age. No, there's a very cute picture of him as a little kid at Candlestick holding up a sign that says like, Mr. White, do what's right, keep the Giants in SF. And it's just very sweet to imagine like whispering to that little kid, like, hey, don't worry. Not only are they going to stay in San Francisco, but one day they're going to win 3 World Series in 5 years. And you, little kid, will play shortstop for 2 of them. I think that's like as wholesome as a sports story can get, is when you get to have tremendous success with your home team.
To wrap it up, the lightning round, that is, you said you used to go see somewhere between 15 and 20 shows a year with your sister. So you've seen a lot of stuff. What is the weirdest thing you've ever seen at a Phish show?
Okay, so there are 2 things that come to mind. One of them wasn't technically at a Phish show, but it was at a Phish after show. It was
Phish adjacent.
Phish adjacent, yes. I can't remember which casino. It was during the Boardwalk Hall, Atlantic City. Was that would have been 2013, the wingsuit year. Yep. So after the show, my sister and I went and met up with our buddy Fishnets at one of the casinos where Stop Making Sense, that Talking Heads cover band that does a lot of like tour adjacent stuff. They're really great. They're so fun to see. God bless you if you are someone who has the stamina to go to after shows. I certainly no longer do. I need to be in bed with my shrimp as soon as possible after the house lights come up. So we're at this show, and Fishnets is, at least in my realm, he is the undisputed king of ground scores. Not just drugs, but like he'll ground score a ferry ticket night 3 of Randall's. He'll ground score just like miraculous objects. But at this show, so there was like a Ziploc like a full sandwich sized Ziploc bag with dust in the bottom. And we're like, is that a huge bag of drugs? So he picks it up. And as soon as he picks it up, like a moth to a flame, this guy shoots over to us and is like, oh, buddy, oh, you got that bag? I was looking at that bag too. What's in the bag? Let's check out what's in the bag. And he's, opens it up before, like, none of us have said a word. This man is driving this whole interaction. And
what
he's
does
just
he
like,
look like? What does this guy look like? Set the scene.
His head is 65% eyeball because his eyes are so wide. There's almost no other features that you can see. Really, really wide, quite sweaty. I feel like he's wearing swim trunks and a cut off t-shirt, like the sleeves cut off sort of t-shirt, which
I was picturing a basketball jersey, like a Supersonics jersey or something.
You might not be wrong, honestly. I remember his biceps were bare. I remember thinking like, wow, it's late October here in New Jersey. And like for this man, it's August everywhere. But
so he sees the bag.
He shoots over to just be like, what's in it? Oh, let's check out what's in that bag. And he's, at this point, maybe someone muttered like, we don't know. We just picked it up. And he's like, let me get a dip. Come on. You got the whole bag. Let me just get a dip. And he dips his finger in and sucks his finger and is like, oh my God, dude, this is a whole bag of sassafras. This is like a grand worth of sassafras. Come on, let me get one more dip. You got the whole bag. Let me get it. And he's just dipping and dipping and dipping, sucking down sassafras. At the time, and even now, I'm not sure that I'm like super clear on what sassafras is, but this guy was over the moon to be getting his licks in here. And then he just disappears. He's like, all right, man, have a great night. And just like shoots off into the evening. We never see him again. Fishnets like tucks the bag into a pocket. None of us were like super keen after this man like dipped his saliva covered finger into it repeatedly. We were like, maybe we don't need to do the drugs from the floor right now. The best part of this was that the next morning we get a text from Fishnets that said like, hey, remember the bag of sassafras? It was a crushed up pecan sandy cookie. The nut is still in the bag. Like, sure enough, like sends us this picture of just what is clearly now in the light of day, a crumbled cookie with a pecan in the midst. And it's just like, oh, someone just packed themselves a nice little treat for the show. It fell out of the pocket, got stepped on. And it's literally the way the cookie crumbles. And like, but that guy was, what a wild ride he had. Yeah.
Don't tell him it's sassafras as far as he's got to know.
Exactly. Was not put off by the fact that it just tasted like butter and sugar and nuts. Oh, and I said there were 2 things that came to mind. The other is sort of a similar story of a bit of a goober at a show, which was, I know you've spoken on the podcast about being type 1 diabetic. So you have an insulin pump and a glucose monitor and stuff. So anytime you're going to a show that has a metal detector, you have to lift up your shirt and tell them like, hey, it's this is what's setting it off. And so at MSG once for a New Year's run, lift up your shirt. Sure enough, they're like, oh, okay, great. You've got to go see the medical officer or whatever he's called. And they gesture over to this man, but the man was engaged in like the most ridiculous Who's on First with this, I mean, absolute cartoon character Wook, like unwashed, dreads to his ankles. Like, again, it is winter on the East Coast. He is wearing like a white tank top, filthy, and like Janko jeans. And he just has his hand out with just like a huge handful of loose pills, which incidentally, he could have easily walked into the venue with if he had left them in his pocket. But when we're going through the metal detector and they say, okay, empty your pockets, he scooped out the loose pills and put them in the little like thing for your change and your keys. And it was like, buddy, you never needed to reveal that you had a pocket full of loose pills. The folks at the metal detector were like, show these to the medical officer. So he's now with the officer that we're waiting behind him. And the officer just keeps saying like, sir, can you tell me what these are for? And he's just like, oh, these are mine. He's like, yeah, no, what are they? Oh, I need these. It's like, okay, what do you need them for? These belong to me. It's like, okay, yes, sir. And it just kept going on like that. Finally, you and I just bailed. I don't think we ever showed your insulin pump to that man. He's probably still wrapped up in this dialogue. Yeah, years later. But I think, yeah, it was so strange to see that Wook be addressed as sir repeatedly. Like it was like such a strange honorific to be attributed to this like absolute goo ball of a human. Just like it was really something. I almost didn't want, like when you were saying like, let's get out of here, I'm not waiting for this. I remember being like, let's see how this plays out. But it was really I mean, we had to go to the show. So had to leave. Don't have a resolution there.
When was this show played?
So this show, October 29th, 2014, took place during the fall 2014 tour. I saw a lot of shows that summer, but for many reasons, the first one being about 5,500 miles of a continent, didn't see any because the fall 2014 tour was exclusively on the West Coast and it was just 12 shows long. Mm-hmm. So during the summer of 2014, the band played just the during the summer of 2014, they just played the East Coast. And as far west as they went as Dicks. That's as far west as they went for the whole summer, and that's just out of tradition. So during the summer, if you lived between Georgia and Colorado, you were out of luck. Mm-hmm. And for the fall tour, if you didn't live between Colorado and Las Vegas, you were out of luck. So it was kind of 2014 was like an extreme year geographically for Phish. You had to be on one of the coasts or in Colorado to be lucky enough to not have to travel so far to see them. And as far as the tour route, it started north in Eugene, Oregon, and moved a little farther north to Seattle, and then went all the way down to Santa Barbara for 2 nights. The next show didn't go far at all. It was at the Forum in Los Angeles. The band stayed in Southern California for the next night in Chula Vista, which I think is near San Diego, right?
Yeah, it's up San Diego.
And then they cut back north to Northern California for 3 nights at the Bill Graham. After one off day, it ended with 3 nights at the MGM in Las Vegas with the famous chilling, thrilling sounds of the haunted house Halloween set. So as I mentioned, I couldn't or didn't see any shows during this tour. I saw plenty of shows in the summer, which was basically the Fuego tour that year, where they played Fuego in, I think, literally every city they stopped. And it's pretty incredible to think that while the band was promoting a recently released album, because Fuego was released in June of 2014, during the tour, they were already rehearsing for a new album, mostly original for all intents and purposes, of the chilling, thrilling set. What are your memories of the 2014 fall tour? Who were you with? Where were you in your life? Why do you think they oversaturated Southern California? Any thoughts you have about that tour?
Totally. So 2014, as I mentioned, is the year I saw Phish the most, so 20 shows. So I saw a ton of East Coast shows. We did do Dicks. We ended up in Miami that year. And for fall, so at the time, my sister and I were both living in New York. And when they announced fall tour and it was on the West Coast, and we're like, oh man. But then we sort of realized, like, why should that stop us? So at the time, she was working for a company called Yammer that had been recently acquired by Microsoft. And so for her, it was like a simple matter of being like, I'm going to go work in the San Francisco office. See ya, and that was not unheard of or, met with any resistance. And for me, I was working at a Chili's in Glendale, Middle Village, Queens. And that was my fourth Chili's that I've worked at. Working at Chili's is a great way to see this country and to see Phish a lot. I would love if you could get sponsored by Chili's. So prior to working at that Glendale Middle Village Chili's, I worked at a Chili's, what I consider my hometown Chili's is San Bruno, California. So for me, I was like, I'm just going to see if they can transfer me back into that system, which lo and behold, they can. So yeah, I was like, I'll transfer back to that Chili's for the month of October, basically. And then we'll just take off and do these shows in the meantime. So we did Eugene, we did Seattle. We skipped Santa Barbara and LA, but we did Chula Vista with our parents, which was the last time we went on a vacation as a family. It was very fun, like right up until my sister and I threw up. It was like the first time we'd been to a show with like, one of us didn't have to be the designated driver. And somehow that venue ran out of beer and all they had was Bud Light Strawberritas, malt beverages.
Oh.
And it was really, that was a brutal show in terms of Strawberritas. I have not had one since, had not had one before. Yeah, it was pretty rough, but it was still fun to share this with our parents and to tie it in with the World Series, being down there with them. I can remember being on the lot and we had a rented station wagon and we had we were literally, tailgating, sitting on the hatch and just blasting AM radio, listening to the Giants. And then we obviously were back home for the Bill Graham shows. Yeah, it really felt like kind of getting away with something to be able to do this, to be based on the East Coast and be able to do so many of these West Coast fall tours. It really felt like we'd really cracked it. So in terms of what I remember about Phish during this time, like you said, that summer tour, that was the Fuego tour. And I remember at that wingsuit Halloween, I think it was Paige that gave that very sincere thank you for like for trusting us and letting us do this and creating a space for us to debut this whole album at once and being such supportive fans. It was very nice. And you could tell it was music they were so excited about. And that felt true all of 2014. I feel like they were having a blast playing everything from that album. And I feel like now looking at that track list, we really only hear like Fuego, 555. They'll still throw like a Halfway to the Moon out there sometimes, or Winter Queen, but like really a lot of those are kind of rare. Like you're not going to get like The Line or Sing Monica or Wombat at most shows.
Not really anymore. Yeah. I mean, that's how it is with almost all of their albums, that they'll play like 13 different songs off an album. And over the course of about a year and a half,
it gets whittled down.
It gets whittled down to maybe 5.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. But it's just so funny to think about a time when it's just like, well, they're almost certainly going to play The Line tonight. It's like, now I would never make
summer
that
2014, it was true.
Yeah, exactly.
Breath and Burning, Tide Turns, The Line. Like, there were some real slaughterhouses of shows I could think of in 2014, if you're a big fan of set lists.
Yeah. I feel like that what I remember from that fall tour was that the band seemed to be having a great time. And when you ask like, why do they oversaturate SoCal with all these dates when they usually don't sell them out? I think at that point, it just felt like that's where the band wanted to go. I mean, Santa Barbara is lovely. It's like for them, it was like, who cares? We don't sell out these nights. We get 2 nights in lovely Santa Barbara. I guess I would call like the southern end of Central, the northern end of Southern California. It's a lovely town. Like they probably just want to go. San Diego, beautiful. Like I think that was just a tour that they was like just devised for them, just wanting to play where they wanted to play. And it seemed like they were having a great time on that tour for sure.
And since the fall tour and the show that you picked today took place on the World Series, and you mentioned your family quite a bit when you're on the West Coast and certainly in San Francisco. Can you tell us a little bit about your history with the Giants, like growing up with them and what it means to you to be a Giants fan?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I do talk about my family a lot. Anytime I'm talking about California, we have very deep roots in California, starting with my great grandmother being born there in like the 1880s. In terms of my life as a Giants fan, it has not been a straight road. It was like not as simple as like, I was born here, this is my team. My first baseball team that I supported was the Toronto Blue Jays, which started because in 1989, I was like a full-on toddler. My parents spent the weekend in Toronto and had left us with our aunt and uncle in Connecticut and brought me back this little light blue shirt for a baby, which I tried to wear so hard, like well into early childhood. Just a shirt for a baby. I was just always like squeezing myself into it like a sausage because I loved it. It was a Toronto Blue Jay shirt, but it just had two Tyrannosaurus Rexes like peeking into the Sky Dome, which I think had opened that year. And it was not like a little kid, like cute dinosaurs. Like they were very scary, correct looking dinosaurs peering into the stadium. And so then I got it in my head that dinosaur was called a Torontosaurus. And that Toronto had, I thought that Toronto like had some kind of like, that's where dinosaurs rule the earth. Toronto
part of the culture.
Yes, like dinosaurs are big in Toronto.
Well, there's the Toronto Raptors.
Yeah, wait, so what's going on? Because I think that probably reinforced it, where I was like, they've got this other team and they're also dinos.
I mean, that was years later. That was 96. So you were like not an adult yet, but you were not a toddler. Yeah.
No, I knew by now that it was Tyrannosaurus Rex, not Torontosaurus. But
I do not know the connection.
But it is.
I think that the Raptors were named the Raptors just capitalizing off the recent success of Jurassic Park.
Probably, yeah. You could sell a lot of jerseys.
Ask Isaiah Thomas. I mean,
riding that Dern high. But anyway,
so how did it go from the Jays back to the Giants?
So buckle up, buddy, because we've got a lot to cover before I get to the Giants. From the Jays, growing up, most of my early baseball memories are in Oakland. It was much cheaper for a family of four to go to a baseball game there than it was at Candlestick. I do have memories at Candlestick as well. Most of them are like of me like trying to slap my face to keep my cheeks from going numb because it was so cold always at Candlestick, even on the 4th of July, freezing cold. But we went to Oakland a lot because it, not only the tickets were cheaper, but a hot dog was cheaper. If we went to a game in Oakland, we could get like programs. Like it was just not as much of like, a huge financial burden as it was to go to Candlestick. So for a while I was an A's fan. So was an A's fan for a while and was certainly like in this period was very much like aware of the Giants. And I've never wished them any harm. This would be the era, like my grandmother was referring to Will Clark as her boyfriend. And definitely for a while when I was like 4 or 5 years old and Will Clark would be like on the news, I'd be like, yes, the boyfriend of my grandmother, Will Clark, until I realized that's just like a thing old ladies say. Then right around probably like, I think it was 97. So yeah, Titanic had come out. I had been awakened sexually. And then shortly thereafter, just developed a crush on like the entire film, Good Will Hunting, like just the whole movie. I just had a crush on.
Sure, and Casey Affleck does it for all of us.
And Cole Hauser, Robin Williams with a beard. I mean, the whole thing is great. And I just became very enamored with the idea of Boston. My mom is from New England and her family has quite deep roots there. And I just considered it like my birthright to be a Red Sox fan. So this was probably 98, 99. This was also like just, being a tween and wanting to be different. And at this point, like new metal was big. A lot of people wearing Yankees caps because of Fred Durst. Like that was just very much around. And I was like, oh, I'm different from that. I'm a Red Sox fan. So very into the Red Sox through high school and college. And I mean, what a time to be alive. I know you as a Yankees fan, I think even you can agree that like there has never been a more exciting time in sports than the 2004 ALCS. That was the most
up to
riveting.
A certain point. Yes. Up to literally one pitch. I would agree with you.
Great. I think, it's hard to resist. It was so thrilling. And at the time I was touring like prospective colleges and happened to be in New York when New York was winning. And I was getting heckled up and down the island of Manhattan because I was wearing all my Red Sox stuff. And then we were in Boston visiting my sister at Northeastern University and looking at colleges myself when Boston won. And it was like, nothing could have been more exciting than that. I remember
Phish wasn't around either. Phish was gone.
And I wouldn't have known if they weren't, because they were miles away. They weren't even a glimmer in my eye at this point. I ended up going to school in New York, and I had a sort of perverse joy in being a Red Sox fan living in New York. And I don't think I ever entered an NYU building that the security guards didn't hassle me about being a Red Sox fan. And I loved it. It was like a fun, just a fun toughening up experience for me. Especially coming from the West Coast, where everyone is really nice to you, to then be like just mercilessly hassled by every old man on every train I ever boarded. So I liked that a lot. But then post college, right after I graduated, I started kind of rambling around for a few years. Lived in Wyoming and Maine and West Virginia and Ohio. I mentioned before South Lake Tahoe, and back in the Bay Area for a little bit. And as much as that was like a hugely formative time in my life, and was really where I formed so much of my personality and cemented a lot of my values, and it was very important to me, but it was also just kind of a lonely time in terms of like moving every 6 months and having to start over, making friends and having a whole new set of friends that I missed, in addition to all the other friends I missed from before and my family. And in those rambling years is really when everything about San Francisco was so special to me. And like, just having been away from it for so long, it just like it really intensified and honed my love for my hometown down to just like a very fine point. So really came back to the Giants at that point. And it was an awesome time to get like to find my way back to my hometown team. Yeah, because this would have been in about 2009 and 2010. Of course, we famously started our World Series kick. I don't know if it's quite a dynasty because it took a year off in between all of them, but to win 3 World Series in 5 years was
I think that's a dynasty.
Pretty unbelievable. And a lot of it was with much of the same team. A lot of those guys were on the team for all 3 or on 2 out of 3, or, it was, I mean, nothing could have been better. I remember in 2010, I was working at my first Chili's in Barboursville, West Virginia. The like clinching night of that World Series, I had to like beg a bartender to put it on TV because they were showing like preseason UK basketball. Like it was like some Hawaiian invitational. And I was just like, this isn't even like an NCAA game. It's just this is the World Series. Can't you put it? And like, it was just, West Virginia's could care less about the Giants World Series. I did eventually get it on like the smallest, dirtiest, most out of the way TV, but it was really special to watch them win that. And then to get to be in California for subsequent wins was a real gift.
Well, for this show, October 29th, 2014. So this was game 7 of the World Series that year against the Kansas City Royals, who would again appear in the World Series the next year and win against the Mets. What about this show, or at least during the Moma Dance, We Are the Champions? Why did you pick this one of all the Phish shows that you've seen? Why do you have attendance bias toward this show and this performance?
I will say that at the moment that they're going into We Are the Champions, I can pinpoint that as being one of the happiest moments of my life. I'll set the scene a little. Basically, what I remember of that World Series, it was very much the Madison Bumgarner show, an unbelievable postseason performance. I think he is still the only pitcher. I could be wrong. You'll fact check this, but I want to say he is the only pitcher who has ever started, relieved, and closed in the same World Series. Unbelievable. And as you mentioned, this game 7, it's all coming down to this. It was a thrilling, unbelievable postseason. I remember in the divisionals against the Nationals, I think it was game 2 or game 3, ended up going to like 18 innings. Like the relief pitcher had to pitch 9 innings. I think it was Yusmar Petit. I'm not sure. You'll fact check it. But anyway, it was an absolutely wild ride of a postseason. We came in, we had to win our way in on the wild card game. Like this was not a team that was like, well, they're favored to win. Like I had to fight for every inch of that postseason. And my sister and we met at no offense to this bar, but I would say a very generic sort of bar near the Civic Center called Hotspot. And the bar was, I would say probably the crowd, about 75% is fans, because it's only a couple blocks behind Civic Center where the Bill Graham is. Riveting game. And then at the end, Madison Bumgarner is brought out to close, and he has already thrown so many pitches in this series that it seems crazy to see him walking out to the mound. I have a memory of this man like holding his pregnant wife's face and saying, if he gets a win here, we're naming the baby Madison. And I would love to know if there is a little like 8-year-old kid named Madison out there now.
Boy or girl, it doesn't matter.
Boy or girl, it works. It's great. It's a great name. It's lucky that it wasn't, Boogers McKenzie on the mound. But so everyone is just absolutely torqued. Like, tensions are running so high, thrilling game. And as it's getting closer and closer to showtime, like all of us in the bar are looking around like, what do we do? Like, how can we go? Like, how can we leave? But it's time for the show. And like, eventually time for the show wins, but we're all walking to Bill Graham. I remember a guy had like a radio. I hadn't seen a radio in a long time, but we're like all kind of walking in a clump so we can hear this guy's radio, and everyone's on their phones. And it was just, we're all trying to stay as connected to the game as we could while we're still getting into the show. And service in the Bill Graham is always been awful. I don't know if it's just that it is this like concrete citadel, but it like is impenetrable to cell phone coverage. And then of course, to add on to that, a few thousand people trying to live stream a sporting event, like it's like my phone just it couldn't work. And we went upstairs to the seats, and luckily the man in front of us had just enough service where he had the like ESPN Gamecast, not even the version of the Gamecast that shows you like the pitches coming in and like it's a ball, it's a strike, like literally just the little box score, and he would just hit refresh every few seconds and until it like, and it doesn't even roll over. It's not like 1 out, 2 out, 3 outs. Like once it never says 3 outs, it just rolls over and just says final all of a sudden. And so seeing that, like this man hit refresh and it reloads slowly and say final, San Francisco Giants win. And that's the moment when you're listening to this Moma Dance where for seemingly no reason, if you don't know what's happening with the baseball team, like seemingly no reason, the crowd just, there's a huge swell of applause. And it's not long after that Trey is counting the band into We Are the Champions. And then the audience is singing that. Everyone is screaming, crying, singing Let's Go Giants. Like it was a moment of like unbelievable euphoria and just bliss. Like it, as much as I had wanted to stay at the bar and watch them get that final out, like I couldn't have asked for a better way and a better place to experience this third World Series win. It was really, really, really special, especially the one before it. The 2012 World Series win was like the first night of Hurricane Sandy. Like it was like the batten down the hatches, the storm is coming night. And so I remember just being in my apartment with like all of my friends who don't like sports at all and just being like, I have to watch this. And then they won. And it was just me alone in my excitement and all of us nervous about the impending storm. So it was like to have that, this was like the opposite of that. It was to be with everyone so excited, so much joy, everyone hugging and high-fiving and crying, and to hear We Are the Champions. Like you could tell the band had this locked and loaded, which is such a like a sweet thing for them to do, and later in the show, I think after the wedge, Paige gives like such a nice congratulations to everyone and how impressed he is with the team. And it was as if any of us had anything to do with this win. He was just like saying, well, you all did a really good job getting the team over the finish line here. And it was just very, very sweet. And like just a night of incredible good feeling, goodwill towards all men.
The show opened with Stealing Time from the Faulty Plan. The first set opened the whole show, which I guess is a benefit of going to a show on the West Coast during the World Series, because on the East Coast, the World Series just gets started at the time that a Phish show is beginning, like around 8:30 or 9 o'clock. So you're on the West Coast, you're toward the end of the game.
Yeah.
So the team, if we switched coasts, if this were in some backwards world on the summer tour on the East Coast, the team would have won the World Series at the very end of the second set or during the encore. So you get it out of the way right away. And the Moma Dance, my general thoughts of the song, I like it a lot, even though it rarely breaks out of its box. It did recently at MSG in the April of 2022, but generally I see it as kind of like a first-time filler or a warm-up song. What do you feel about the Moma Dance?
I mean, the Moma Dance for me is track 2 always, because that's what it was at my first show. So in my mind, I'm like, that is the song they play second. That's great. I love it. I'm getting into my groove. But yeah, I agree. I don't know that other than this one, which is one of the most special moments in my fishery, other than this one, I don't know that I've seen like a remarkable Moma Dance, but I'm never like, ugh, Moma Dance, when I hear the opening chords, So yeah, I think it's a perfectly cromulent tune. And this one, obviously a special joy, but for the most part, it isn't.
Yeah, this one has a very typical funky opening, trade noodles a little bit with the wah-wah pedal, normal breakdown. I think, like what you said, it's exactly what one would expect in the 2 spot of a first set. And I do think that they chose it on purpose, because if the Giants did win in this case, they needed something that they could just break into. We are the champions, uninterrupted, totally. Not thick. They couldn't be in the middle of like, you enjoy myself and in like this 9-part complex composed piece, and all of a sudden break into a Queen song. They needed something that they could just vamp for a while. And that happens. The vocals begin at about 2 minutes and 45 seconds, and you could hear it. The crowd starts going nuts after 3 minutes, almost exactly on the spot. Obviously, the Giants had won the World Series. Were you looking over that guy's shoulder at his game cast, or did you just get it from by osmosis from the crowd around you?
No, for me, it was instantaneous. It was, he hits refresh, phone screen slowly loads, and this time, instead of saying, 2 outs and whatever the pitch count was at that point, like it says 2 outs, final, Giants win. That is happening in tandem with the first little bits of applause. So I feel like, if you picture like a parabola of everyone finding out what had just happened, like I definitely found out on the upswing. So was part of that swelling noise of applause. It's funny listening now, and you could say like, oh, it's a little bit of an awkward, like clumsy transition. But to me, it felt so seamless that it was like crackerjack precision. It was it was like, as everyone has reached this sort of fever pitch of applause of everyone now knows the Giants just won the World Series, it was timed so perfectly to me in the moment of just hearing we are the champions. And it's such a recognizable song that it really only takes people those first few notes to get on board with singing along. The band doesn't sing it, I don't think, right? It's just the crowd singing. Yeah. So that is perfect to hear in, an audience recording or the soundboard, just that it's everyone absolutely screaming at the top of their lungs, the chorus of We Are the Champions.
Yeah. And we're lucky enough that this performance is on YouTube. There's like a straight up shot of the whole band. It's not from Live Phish. I don't think it's from a webcast, but someone had the presence of mind to have the whole band in a frame. Yeah. And you could see at just less than 4 minutes, you could see Trey make this big gesture to the rest of the band to kind of get everyone's attention as he leads the way into We Are the Champions. It's something like you suggested, they definitely planned backstage before coming on, and they go right into We Are the Champions. It is one full chorus of the song. Other than that, sorry, but the semi-awkward transition, once they get into it, it is flawless. You can hear the whole crowd sing along, and it must be so much fun to be at a Phish show. And when your team is in a championship game and it's game 7 and they win, they did this with the, I think it was 2021, was it? With the Blues, the St. Louis Blues.
And played Gloria.
They played Gloria.
Yeah. Fabulous. Really fun. Yeah. Phish is a very generous band when it comes to sports fans. I mean, they're generous in a lot of ways in terms of sharing a lot of their time with us, but for sports fans, I remember in Worcester, I think it was the previous fall, 2013, the Cardinals and the Red Sox were playing. And I remember at set break, like you said, to your point about East Coast shows, like, you're really going in the meat of the game. That's prime time East Coast, baby. And, everyone rushing at set list to the TVs around the concession area at I think it's the DCU Center or something is the name.
The Worcester Central, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone watching for as long as they could, and then, kind of seeing in your peripheral vision, seeing the house lights go back down, and you got to rush back to your seat. And it had been scoreless, I think, or like it had been tied, I want to say, all through set break. And then the band comes back out and Paige says, top of whatever inning, Cardinals X amount, Red Sox 1 point more than that. And everyone goes nuts and cheers, let's go Red Sox. And it's just like, how nice as a Mets fan for Paige to just be like, they all want to know how the Red Sox are doing. Like, I should give them the update. They probably didn't see it before they got back to their seats. So yeah, very generous band for any sports market. It's really, really a gift that they give us.
And after that one chorus of We Are the Champions, they go right back into the Moma Dance. And you can see on the video, it's super fun. You could see Trey bouncing like he does and do the 1, 2, 3, 4 count right back in. And that is flawless. There is no stop. There is no awkwardness. And they go straight into the up the rigging, taking sail, mind the skipper will not fail. They go right into that verse as if they never played We Are the Champions to begin with. It's really fun. The crowd is extra pumped during the guitar and vocal line, and they step out a little bit, not by much toward the end of the song, just enough to notice, and then the song is over and they play Free.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it was very funny for me looking back in preparation for recording this to look back at that set list. And it's like, I don't remember a thing after Moment. Like, it was such, for this show, I will say fairly sober. I mean, we were drinking beers at the hotspot. I don't remember getting any beers at Bill Graham. Like, I think I had come right from work at Chili's. Like, this was, I have no chemical reason to not have these memories other than just like my brain was so flooded with serotonin and dopamine and whatever the other happiness chemicals are that like I remember Moma Dance and We Are the Champions like it was yesterday. Not a single memory of this, like them other than Paige's nice speech congratulating us on the win. Like the encore, I think was like contact something else and then character zero. Don't like looking at that set list. It was just like, okay, like if you say so, Phish.net, I sure as hell can't tell you. So yeah, just a true absolute blur of positive emotion from that night. So yeah, I mean, if you played me that Free 10, 29, 14 and like, a lineup of other Frees, there's a 0% chance I could identify this one. But I will always be able to pull out this Moma Dance, because even that starting from the Up the Rigging verse was like one of the most high energy Moma Dances in terms of crowd energy, instead of people kind of buckling down and getting into their groove, and which is how I normally sort of find that 2 spot to be, depending on what the song is. This was like the most engaged Moma Dance from a crowd perspective that I had ever experienced before or since.
Well, Michela Ratto, thank you so much for joining us today on Attendance Bias to tell us about East Coast versus West Coast, the best sandwiches in at least 3 different spots across the country on tour, your family, and of course, Moma Dance with We Are the Champions from October 29th, 2014 at the Bill Graham Civic Auditorium, the BGCA in San Francisco. It was a pleasure having you. Thank you.
Oh, Brian, the pleasure was all mine. Thank you so much for having me, and go Giants.
Well, I may know a little bit about Phish, but I don't know as much about baseball history, and I learned during this interview why I did not pursue a career in broadcasting, certainly baseball broadcasting, because we had quite a fact check to go over after today's interview, and now it's time to learn what we missed with the Attendance Bias Fact Check.
Attendance Bias Fact Check.
Michela's first show was on August 17th, 2012 at the Bill Graham. As she correctly pointed out, the show opened with AC/DC Bag, the second set opened with Down with Disease, and she was able to see many more Phish mainstays, such as a First Tube Encore, a Moma Dance into Possum in Set 1, a Slave to the Traffic Light first set closer, as well as a notable Tweezer in Set 2. Again, they're not an official sponsor or any sponsor at all, but anyone interested in the PYM, Prepare Your Mind Anxiety Chews, the link is in today's show notes. If you are wondering, a number 2 at In-N-Out is a cheeseburger combo. My order is a classic number 1, which is a double burger with fries and a drink, animal style. Michela's first outdoor show was in Bangor, Maine in 2013. The date of that show was July 3rd, 2013. The show featured an unfinished Silent in the Morning, Manteca, and a second set full of jam monsters, which went Golden Age, Twist, Backwards Down the Numberline, Ocelot, Rock and Roll, 2001, Cavern, and closing with Run Like an Antelope with a Harry Hood encore. The special run at the Bill Graham in 2016 that Michela brought up was from July 18th through 20th that year. The Great No Quarter that she mentioned was played on night 2 deep in the second set. The Crazy Bust Out show was on night 3, July 20th. That show and that set specifically has been brought up on this podcast before, and the first set was filled with rarities. The rumor is that record producer Bob Ezrin was in the audience and the band was playing this set of extra Fishy songs just for him. The first set list was Demand, The Curtain With, Alumni Blues, Fuck Your Face, Cry Baby Cry, Sing Monica, McGrupp, The Very Long Fuse, Big Black Furry Creatures from Mars, Walk Away, Sanity, and David Bowie. The encore of that show, which I covered on its own mini episode of Attendance Bias, was Character Zero, where Trey turned the microphone around and the audience sang virtually every word of the lyrics. If you want that delicious Italian sandwich that Michela describes in Saratoga, the name of the market is Cardona's Market, and it is located at 222 Washington Street in Saratoga Springs. The JT Snow Darren Baker incident was in Game 4 of the 2002 World Series between the Giants and the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, or whatever they were called back then. In the bottom of the 7th inning, Kenny Lofton hit a rocket to right field, allowing 2 Giants to score. Right after JT Snow crossed the plate, Darren Baker, who was then the 3-year-old son of the Giants manager, was acting as the bat boy. He ran to the plate during the play while it was still active to grab Lofton's helmet. The toddler didn't realize that there were still players running the bases and crossing home plate, and he was nearly run over by base runner David Bell. However, San Francisco Giant JT Snow swooped in and literally picked up Baker to get him out of the way. Incidentally, the play gave the Giants a 6-run lead, but they eventually lost this series overall to the Angels that year. And extra point to Michela. She was right. Darren Baker was recently drafted by the Washington Nationals. Michela mentioned going to see Stop Making Sense, a Talking Head tribute band, during the 2013 Atlantic City Phish Halloween run. The band is actually named Start Making Sense. Even though that wook in Atlantic City was wrong when he mistook a pecan sandy cookie for sassafras, it turns out that he kind of knew what he was looking for. According to Healthline.net, sassafras is a drug with many similarities to Molly, even having nearly identical scientific names, which I will decline to try to pronounce here. Commonly used Molly tests cannot even differentiate between the 2 drugs. According to Healthline, both drugs are stimulant, hallucinogenic, and pathogens, but Molly gives you more of the, quote, lovey feels, while sassafras produces a heavier high with more energy and visual effects. The effects of sassafras tend to last longer, too. Atlantic City Wook, if you're out there listening, I hope you found your way home that night. And in the related Wook stories, the guy with the fistful of loose pills who could not quite make his way past the medical supervisor at the Garden, that was during the Baker's Dozen and not during the New Year's run. In my memory of the Baker's Dozen, by night 4 of the whole run, anyone could bring almost anything into the Garden, and security took a laissez-faire attitude toward us fans. When discussing the Blue Jays, Michela was right. The Sky Dome, now known as the Rogers Center, did open in 1989. And still on the topic of Toronto, looking at the Wikipedia article about the Toronto Raptors, the team name was influenced by the popularity of Jurassic Park. The Raptors was one of 11 finalist name choices, some of which were the T-Rex, the Towers, the Beavers, and the Terriers. I couldn't find the exact details of whether or not 2014 Giants pitcher Madison Bumgarner is the only pitcher to start, relieve, and close in the World Series, but I did find out from Sports Illustrated that he earned a win in 2 World Series starts and then earned a win by closing a game with a 5-inning relief effort, so he ended up with a 3-0 record in the World Series. He is the only pitcher to do that. An amazing recall from Michela in the same portion of the episode when she recalled the 2014 Divisional Series. Game 2 did go 18 innings, with Yusmeiro Petit of the Giants getting the win. I was wrong when referencing Phish's performance of Gloria by Laura Branigan to celebrate the St. Louis Blues winning the Stanley Cup. I thought it was 2021, but it was actually performed on June 12, 2019 at the Chaffetz Arena in St. Louis. And, for the record, the encore of this show at the Bill Graham was Contact, Meat Stick, and Character Zero. And that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Michela Ratto for joining me today, Phish.net for their help with the fact check, and Phish.in for the recording used in today's episode. If you enjoy Attendance Bias, please support the show by leaving a rating and a review of the show on your favorite podcast app. You can also support the show financially at www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias. Thank you so much again for listening, and I'll see you next week on Attendance Bias.